This Halloween, there are a lot of Halloween costume ideas floating around out there, but it's sometimes hard to figure out which ones you should buy and which ones you should DIY. So the question is, buy or DIY Halloween edition? Hello and welcome to the Queendom. I'm Sarah Engel, and today we're gonna go through a bunch of different Halloween costumes and see which ones you should just buy at a store versus which ones you should DIY. Some of the criteria include, is it cheaper? Is it going to look better? Is it gonna take so long that it's just not worth it? Because DIYs definitely have some pros and cons. Some of the pros are it's first just very rewarding to feel like I made this. It's also very unique. No one's gonna have anything that looks just like yours. Another thing is sometimes you just don't have time for shipping. If you're looking for last minute Halloween costumes, sometimes even Amazon Prime isn't fast enough. Also, sometimes it's often the cheaper option. Some things like the prices, especially around Halloween, they jack up the prices of certain Halloween costume items, and it would be way cheaper if you just make it yourself. And other times it's literally the only option. If you have something really creative or you want to make something really, really elaborate. Sometimes it's just not out there. For instance, I really wanted Mal's spellbook. They sold them in the Disney store, but they don't make this anymore. Making it was the only option. And sometimes if you're doing something really creative or want to go something a little more ornate and realistic, DIYing is your only option. However, there are definitely some major drawbacks of DIYs. A lot of DIY channels will totally ignore this and act like, oh, DIY, it's always cheaper. A lot of times, DIYing things, once you buy all the supplies and all of the gadgets and gizmos aplenty required to, what are the tools? So often, DIYs are way more expensive than just buying something. And sometimes some of the DIYs are so incredibly time intensive, even if they are cheap to make, that it would probably be faster for you just to order it from Amazon. They also don't always have the most perfect finishing, depending on how experienced you are at making DIYs. Like, sometimes they look really, really good. Like some people, you're like professional DIY experts, and what you make is gonna look fantastic, way better than anything you're gonna buy. For most of us, your DIYs are gonna be sometimes slightly misshapen or a little wonky looking, and even if you're comparing that to a really cheap something you find at Party City or Walmart, the cheap something at Party City or Walmart is probably still gonna look more polished than whatever concoction you created, unless you found a DIY that's really easy and simple and clean to do. So I've got a whole list of DIYs to avoid. Number one is what actually prompted this entire video: Maleficent horns. So how this whole video came to be is I am still making a Maleficent makeup tutorial, and I also wanted to be like, what kind of DIY could I do with that? I need Maleficent horns. Why don't I do DIY Maleficent horns? Well, I went to see what was out there already and comparing that with all the supplies cost. Basically, when you compare how much it would cost and the extreme amount of time it would take to make these, it is way more cost efficient, way more time efficient just to order these on Amazon. I think these are like 10, 15 bucks. They look pretty legit. Let me like bend down so you can see I'm like bowing. Anyway, they actually look really legit, and if you made these, in order to get perfectly symmetrical, perfectly Maleficent shaped horns, I can't even imagine what a nightmare that would be. It would look really wonky, and the supplies would literally cost you more than it would take to just buy these. So DIY or buy with Maleficent horns, please just buy these unless you really, really are in the mood to make some very creative Maleficent horns. It's like an added bonus for literally any of these. You can always buy something that's like more basic and decorate it and tweak it and use it as your base. So sometimes it's not worth just starting from nothing. Just buy something as your base, and if you want to add any additional details to this, you could really easily do that. And truly, like, This is gonna be so much cheaper and easier. Number 2 DIY to avoid is most jewelry. You can buy cheap costume jewelry, especially things with like rhinestones and stuff, for really, really cheap. Especially look on Amazon, Walmart, Target, Party City. They have jewelry out there that's pretty cheap. If you try and make it yourself, it's either going to take a long time, look kind of like garbage, or it's gonna be really expensive. To buy individual rhinestones or Swarovski crystals that look decent, that price can add up really quickly. So most jewelry, I would say, do not buy it. No, wait, do not DIY it. Number 3 are your animal ears and tails. Animal ears, you could actually make these like kind of easily, but they're so cheap if you want to be a bunny cat, both at the same time. They're these are really, really cheap. You can get these for a few dollars, like at a dollar store. And by the time you actually bother to make all of your fancy little DIY bunny ears, you're gonna have to deal with, are they misshapen? These ones are gonna be basically the right size if you buy them. So for another one that you should definitely buy, don't DIY, is a lot of the animal ears and tails too. Number 4 is shoes. I don't know if too many people are trying to DIY shoes, but even painting shoes or the hydro dipping of shoes, it's really, really hard to do that. Because when you wear shoes, you don't always think about this, the paint starts to crack and it will wear off and will look really icky really fast. A lot of times you can find shoes that look like what you want them to look like. You don't have to put all the time and effort into painting some elaborate thing on them. I will say there is one exception. Anna boots. If you want some Anna boots, if you just get some regular boots, you can pretty easily paint with a gold leaf pen the pattern that's on Anna's boots onto those. But if it's something that involves painting an entire boot, just try and find a boot that's actually the right color, because as soon as you start wearing it, it's gonna crack, and you don't want that. Number 5 is a flower crown. You might think, oh, a flower crown, that's the perfect thing to DIY. I'll just go to the store and buy some of those little fake flowers and make them into a crown. And unless you're going for a very specific flower crown, a very specific, very ornate flower crown, I don't recommend this, because you can get a flower crown for probably cheaper than half of the flowers you're gonna buy individually. They're gonna make like a couple dollars for a flower crown versus if you go to Joann's or Hobby Lobby and buy little bunches of flowers or individual flowers. Sometimes the flowers will literally cost more than the whole crown. Number 6, wings. I'm not talking about the fancy wings that I was showing you in the Disney Princesses Fairies group that Hello Fairy made. Those are very, very expensive custom wings, and honestly, unless you're an expert at that kind of stuff, they'd probably be pretty hard to make anyway, so you still might want to buy them versus all the time and money it would take into buying all the supplies and trying to design something that's going to look even like a fraction of as good. The thing is, you can actually buy pretty cheap wings at Party City, at Walmart, and if you want to make them a little bit more elaborate, you can decorate them some more yourselves, versus if you're trying to start from scratch and make wings, that's gonna be a really big project and probably cost you more than just buying one already made. Number 7 is mermaid shells. They seem like a nice little DIY project. If you happen to already have a mold, that's also very unlikely. The mold probably is going to cost you more than buying the actual shells. If you find somewhere you have to make a mold, it's just a lot of work. They seem like, in my head anyways, they seem like, oh, it shouldn't be hard to make. They're hard to make. If you want to find some basic mermaid shells and bling them out and decorate them, I recommend going that route. Mermaid shells are one that's probably going to be easier to buy than to DIY. Number 8 is another one that I speak from experience, and this isn't even just Halloween costume accessory. This is a whole costume. Harry Potter robes, and I speak from experience here. It literally cost me more to make my own Harry Potter robes than it would have cost me to just buy them outright. And the fancy nice ones, you can buy some cheapy Halloween ones for way, way, way less. But truly, I spent so much money on making my sister and me Hogwarts robes. It was insane. And you've got like the lining, because you've got the different lining on the outside. It's actually a lot. For people who are super used to sewing, you're probably making your own Halloween costumes anyway, and you already know what to buy, what to DIY. But it's hard when you're dealing with really big pieces of fabric, unless you're somebody who's sewing all the time and has like a workspace for that. Dealing with those huge pieces is incredibly difficult. Number 9, wigs. Poor dear Jenna Marbles. She wanted so badly to make her own wig, and I thoroughly enjoyed watching her attempt to make her own wig, but it's going to be cheaper and way less stressful just to buy a wig, because that's just a project that nobody needs to encounter. Number 10 is fake weapons. Weapons and anything like moldable, that is a big project. Like, you might be able to mold some stuff out of clay relatively cheaply, but when you add in the clay, the paints, and the incredible amount of time that it would take to make that, there's some really, really cheap, like I'm thinking like little Star Wars blasters, like Padme's blaster. There's really, really cheap ones out there, anywhere from like Wish, Party City, Amazon. There's so many cheap ones out there that if it's not exactly what you want, you can like upgrade it, add your own details to it. But trying to make your own from scratch, it's probably gonna look really misshapen. It's not gonna look like what you want it to, and you're gonna spend all this time and probably around the same amount that it's gonna cost just to buy yourself your own little blaster online or at Party City. Number 11 for do not DIY, buy instead, masks. I don't know how many people are trying to make their own masks, but just in case you are, that's a project. Like, and you gotta put your head in it, and it's just so much. You can buy some pretty cheap masks out there. I don't know why you would try to DIY your own mask. Just don't do it. I'm not even gonna elaborate anymore on that. Just buy your mask, don't DIY it. Number 12 is another very specific one. Freddy Krueger hands with his little like scissors. Those are very difficult to make, and yes, you could DIY a pair, but there's so many options out there that are so cheap. It's like we get this idea in our head like, oh, I could DIY it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. If you just search for it really quickly and you're like, oh, they already make this, and it's like $11. The last one, gloves. This one actually, you know whose idea this was? Glimmerwood. If you saw, Glimmerwood made my Sleeping Beauty fairy costume, and she is a costume expert if ever there was one. First thing she thought of when she was thinking something don't DIY, just buy, she said gloves. And if the costume expert that good, who's such an expert seamstress, says gloves in general, gloves are such a pain to make. This is one I've not personally tried, but if Cassie of Glimmerwood says don't do it, don't do it. Just buy gloves. Plus, gloves are actually pretty cheap. So those are 13 things that you should buy instead of DIY. But what about the things that you should DIY instead of buy? The first one that I'm gonna show you is something we actually made here on this channel. Fancy crowns. If you're going for one that's just for Halloween, this will more than do the trick. I have a whole tutorial on how to make crowns. You can make whatever one. This is specifically Aurora's crown, kind of park style. And a lot of crowns that are this ornate looking cost, oh my gosh, like this costs like a few dollars to make, and one of these would cost probably like $80 or more if you wanted something that looks even remotely similar. So that's when I do recommend DIYing. Number 2, I have seen out there some very fancy Minecraft costumes, and the ones that look the best tend to be homemade ones, and they're not hard to make because they're just boxes. Versus if you buy one of the Minecraft costumes, I feel like they're kind of funny looking. Number 3 is ornate unicorn horns. I say ornate because if you want to go with a cheap unicorn horn, you can find one of those, but here's one that I made. You just put it on your head here. Whee, I'm a magical unicorn. Here's another one I made a couple years ago, or if you could look at the black, dark, mysterious unicorn. Can you see that? hopefully. You can make them super ornate and detailed, and they were pretty easy to make. Basically with just some clay, some little stick-on rhinestones, and a headband. Number 4 is one that may surprise you, are Harry Potter wands. And I actually own a lot of Harry Potter wands, like the fancy ones. But you can make, especially if you're just looking for a Halloween costume, Harry Potter wands really easily. Maybe we'll do that in a tutorial, but basically if you just take a chopstick and you decorate it with hot glue to make the pattern on it and then paint it, it looks really, really good. There's tutorials out there already if you wanna see those, and they're fun to do too. Number 5, one that I don't understand why. If you wanna go with the classic ghost costume, they actually make, like, you can buy a classic ghost costume, but just something so funny to me about seeing somebody actually use a sheet and cutting like the eye holes in it for a ghost costume. I've seen people do it and it's always like hilarious and amazing, and every time I've seen someone do it, everyone loves it. The last one was a category of costumes, and it's modern humans in modern clothes. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of character costumes out there, humans like Scooby-Doo characters or TV show characters, and they put together like a very specific costume for that character. But the thing is, when you buy a Halloween costume, a lot of times the quality, I mean, it's just garbage. It just looks really cheesy and really cheap. So if there's a character that wears a purple dress, you can probably, if at a thrift store, find a purple dress that's gonna be cheaper, and it's gonna be made like actual clothing. So it's not gonna be that weird, super thin, awkwardly shaped, synthetic, like polyester material that seems like every Halloween costume is made of. So there we go. There are our DIY or buy, our lists of things that you should buy instead of DIY, and the reverse, the things that you should DIY instead of buy. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other tips for which things you should buy or DIY. If you want to see more videos about making your life a little bit more magical, including lots of, especially this time of year, Halloween and costume themed videos, make sure to subscribe and ring the little bell if you want those videos to come right to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Any makeup that was on my forehead is not gonna be when we're done. Siren. A hiccup! Singular hiccup. Duh, hiccups. For once, it's more than one. But what about the things that you should... I had to think about that.